So in this tutorial we will cover how we can automate the incorrect login failure. So that means that when user tries to log in with an incorrect combination of username and password, it should fail and it should give this error message on the login page itself. So we will write a new test for this. I'll just copy the code for the login and I'll paste it here. We will rename the method to it asserts that incorrect login fails, and the test will be mostly similar to the login. So we visit the login page, we type in the email address in the email field, we give an incorrect password in the password field, we press the login button, and instead of redirecting to the admin company's page, the user should redirect back to the login page. And also we should assert that we see this error message in here. So that's the test, and pretty simple. We'll just run this test. And it passes. So we have been able to make sure via Laravel Dusk that if a user provides an incorrect username and password, it does not let him in and it redirects back and it fails gracefully. Going ahead, we can also test that users see this message, but also this text box appears in red border. So usually when you open the login page, these two text boxes come in the gray border, but when the login fails, this comes in the red border. And how this is functioning is, so this is the input field. We have applied a is invalid class when the login fails, and if you go into the styles, you will see that for is form control is invalid, we have the border color to be of this red color. If I just change this, the border comes back in the gray color. So basically I want to make sure that when the login fails, we have this is invalid class applied to the input field. So if you go into the documentation of Laravel Dusk, they have a list of assertions that we can perform on a page. So here is the list of assertions, and if you see that we don't have any such assertions that can help us to find that a particular class name is present in the list of class strings. So we have to write our own code for this, and we will utilize the attribute method of Dusk to do that. So what attribute method does is, if you pass on the selector or the element and give it what attribute value you are looking for, it will return you the attribute text value. So let's just utilize this to write our code. So what we are looking to do is browser attribute. I am looking to get the attribute for input field whose name is email, and I am looking to get the class field. So this is what we are looking to get from here. So if you inspect this, you will see that it has two classes, form control and is invalid. What I'm really looking for is that this class is invalid in this. So what we will do is we will get the list of all the classes and we will convert it into an array. How we can do that is we'll apply the explode method. So separated by comma, all the values should form an array. And once we have an array, we can use the inArray method to check is this class really contains this field. Sounds good? So inArray, and this is an array, and this checks if this particular element is present in the array. We also need to make sure that if it doesn't contains, we should get an appropriate response in terms of assertions. So we can utilize PHP unit assertions directly in the Dusk test. So all the PHP assertions that you have been using, or if you know, that also includes assert true and assert false, assert C, we can directly make use of those in our Laravel Dusk test. So since the PHP unit is since the Laravel Dusk is extending the PHP unit test base, when you reference to this, it basically refers to the PHP unit object, and this assert true. So this is what our code is. We'll just make it more readable. I'll run this test again to see this, whatever changes we have done works. And it passes. So we have been able to make sure that when the login fails, we also apply an isInvalid class to the input field. So this works fine, but it doesn't look neat, and we have broken the chain of browser methods because we wanted to do something like this, and this code is not looking very readable. So what we can do is we can extract this method into a browser macro. So if I take you into the Dusk documentation and we see the browser macros, so what browser macro, as per the documentation, the browser macros definition is, if you would like to define a custom browser method that you can reuse in a variety of your tests, you may use the browser macro. So whatever we have written here is suitable for extracting to a macro, because going ahead there might be multiple use cases where we are looking for a particular class in the list of class string, and I don't want to repeat this code again and again. So we will just extract this code to a browser macro. And in order to have a browser macro created, you need to register a service provider. In this case, it's Dusk service provider. You can name the provider anything you want. So let's go ahead and create a service provider and register our new browser macro in that. So I'll just open my terminal. The way you create a browser macro is the way you create a new service provider is PHP artisan make provider, and we will name the provider Dusk service provider. So the provider is created successfully. Next up, we'll see that we have a new provider in the providers folder. Currently it's empty. We will just register this provider in the config app.php file. So we will register the provider here. So once this is registered, we can now register the browser macros in the Dusk service provider. So we will open the Dusk service provider. I'll just copy the code of a sample browser macro from here, and we will register it in our boot method. So this input is what you will call your browser macros with. So this is the method name. So since we are since we are checking that if a particular class is there in the element, we can name the browser macro to be assert element has class, and it should accept the two parameters. One is the element we are looking the particular class exists, and second is what class name we are looking for. Next up, what we can do is we can make use of PHP unit assert class. I'll just import it on the top. PHP unit framework assert, and we will just use it as PHP unit. So we will make use of this assert class for our assertions. So we want to make sure that PHP unit assert true, and in here we will pass the code that we just wrote for the assertion. So basically this code. So we are looking that if a particular class, so in this case we'll just pass the class name, and the input field will be the element. So we are asserting, and the browser class is available via this object. So we are asserting that a particular class exists in the particular element, and as the second parameter we can pass the error message in case the class is not found in the list of classes. So the user should get an appropriate error message in terms this fails. So we can write something like did not see expected value will be of class in, or let's say within, element and the element name. So we have extracted the code that we wrote to check if a particular class exists in an element in a browser macro, and now since this macro is registered, we can make use of this browser macro instead of this whole thing, and we won't need to break our chain. So next up I'll write this thing. I'm looking for class in the input field email, and the class name is invalid. We'll run this test again to see that whatever functionality we extracted works fine. So I'll run this test again, and it fails. So it's not able to find the browser object, so I think we forgot to import that. So we'll just import the browser class. Alright, so I think we are good to run it again. And it passes. So we have extracted the code into a browser macro, and we can make use of that browser macro again and again in our code, so it's reusable. And let's just make sure that this method works for the both cases. So I'll just pass some gibberish class here, let's say form control, okay, something that doesn't exist in the list of classes, and this should fail. So we'll run this test again, and it fails, and we should get a proper error message right in here. Did not see expected value, this thing within element this. So I'll just change it back to what it should be, and that's it for now. In the next tutorial I'll take you through how we can have a different environment configuration for our Dusk test in order to use a different database, or if you want to have some different properties particularly for your Dusk test. So that's it for now. See you in the next tutorial.